Leaders are not born in a womb. They are forged through heat, pressure, and a whole lot of sweat. The Fire Forged Leader podcast serves the audience through exploring leadership at work, in the community, and with the family, using a practical perspective and real-life experiences from the host, Steve Baumgartner, and his guests in The Forge. Now, it's time to enter the Forge with the Fire Forged Leader.
What is up, leaders? It's great to be back for another lesson here in the Forge. I really appreciate y'all for joining me here today. I just want to tell you, today I'm not going to be talking about work so much. To be honest with you, I'm a little bit sick and tired of the work talk. It's been taking over a little bit too much of my life lately. So, even though this lesson applies everywhere, I'm really going to be talking about leadership in the home for a little bit. So I'm going to talk about a conversation that I had with my son. He's only 4 years old. And really, there was a huge lesson that we walked through here the other day. It was one where I was able to meet him where he was at, in the moment, and also getting the chance to teach him a very valuable lesson at the same time. So I want to just first off state that sometimes the best lessons aren't the ones that we've planned and prepared for. Rather, they're really the ones that happen organically. So once again, my boy's 4-year-old. He was sitting there eating a snack, and I was sitting there reading a book, right? We just happened to be in close proximity. And he was just staring down at his plate pretty intensely, right? And I glanced over a couple times, and I realized he was looking at his Avengers plate. Didn't really think too much about it because he was just looking at the characters, examining them. You know, he's a pretty intense little kid. But he was really in this deep thought, and there was this silence that just was going on at that point in time. And I can't really explain it except for that it was just peaceful. It was intense, but it was peaceful at the same time. He was looking down at his plate. I was reading my Ed Milet book, which is The Power of One More. If you haven't read it, go do it. It's an awesome book. Just finished it the other day. So my son, he abruptly just starts talking to me after he's been sitting here silently eating his snack, looking at his plate. So Dominic starts off by saying, "Hey, Dad, do you love Spider-Man?" I kind of gave him one of them half glances over, might have pulled my glasses down my nose a little bit. I said, you know what, son? No, I really don't love Spider-Man. I like Spider-Man. I think he's an interesting character, but I don't love him. Pushed the glasses back up the bridge of my nose. He went back to looking at his plate. I don't know how long went by, maybe a couple seconds, maybe a couple minutes. I'm not really sure. But he starts talking to me again, and Dominic says, "Hey, Dad, how about Iron Man? Do you love Iron Man?" This time I kind of half chuckle. I'm like, no, son, I don't really love Iron Man either. I think he's a neat character, but I don't really love him, and I think really he's kind of pompous. I probably used another word besides pompous, by the way, but something a 4-year-old would understand, but I remember the sentiment that I gave him. Once again, I go back to reading my book. Dominic goes back to looking at his plate. A couple seconds, couple minutes roll by again, and Dominic goes, "Hey, Dad, what about the Hulk? Do you love the Hulk?" So a lot of times it takes me about 3 times to really understand that I need to be paying more attention. But at this point in time, it really sinks into my thick skull that this boy is really trying to understand me as his father, right? He's trying to understand what I'm about. He's doing it through what's in front of him, what he's seeing and he's interested in. And he wants to be able to emulate me as my son. But it also happened at the same exact time where I had this little bit of an epiphany myself. Because the Hulk is actually a character that stirs up a little bit of emotion for me, right? So as he's thumbing through these characters and gets to the Hulk, it kind of clicks in my head. And I say back to him, you know what, Dom? I'm not sure that I love the Hulk either, but I will tell you that the Hulk's probably the one that I understand the most. And I don't think Dominic has really looked up from his plate at this point in time. And he kind of looks up at me towards the side and he goes, he's giving me that look like a puppy that's seen a frog for the first time, right? He's got his head cocked to the side, got this just inquisitive look on his face. He goes, what do you mean, Dad? Like, well, Dom, I really understand what it's like to be angry. I understand what it's like to be angry at the world. I really understand what it's like to be angry at everyone around me. And angry enough that I just want to smash stuff and really go crazy. And then Dominic asked me, well, do you ever go crazy, Dad? I could have probably just stopped the conversation there and said something like, I don't know, Dominic, have you ever seen me gone crazy? I could have definitely done that. However, this question opened the door with my son on something that we could connect on. He was in the right mindset to learn, and I had the ability at that point to be able to teach him. So we had a great discussion on this topic, to be honest with you. It was amazing that I was talking with a 4-year-old. The clarity and the understanding that he had that day was far better than probably any conversation that I've ever had with him. That day we talked about emotions. We talked about remaining in control, not allowing the darkness, the anger, to be stronger than the light that we have within us. Then we talked more about the Hulk, and in different shows and places, the Hulk's been depicted in a lot of different cartoons my son has watched, as well as, when I look back to the 80s and 90s and, all of the different movies that Marvel has made over the years. And we talked about 3 main points. We talked about the times when the Hulk lets his rage overtake him and he's out of control. When he goes too far, when he hits someone with a car, or when he, smashes things up just to smash things up. And we talked about that and how that is taking our anger too far. And that those behaviors, when we exhibit those, they're scary. They're, some would say, toxic, right? We also talked about the other end of that when you have Bruce Banner. When Bruce Banner cowers down and says, don't make me mad. You won't like it when I get mad. Right? And that's in some of the older shows. I'm not sure if it's in too many of the newer shows. But when Bruce Banner acts like this, he's given up his power to someone else, right? Don't make me mad. I'm not in control. So we talked about that and how that's actually a weakness of Bruce Banner, right? It's a weakness of the Hulk. Most people don't look at the Hulk as weak, but when you don't control your emotions, it is weak. Whether it goes too far or whether you give someone else the power. And then finally, we talked about this third point. And this one's pretty interesting, really, because I really like how, when I stop to think about this, how the Hulk is portrayed in the modern day movies. And it almost seems like he's matured or gained power over this condition that makes him the Hulk. So Bruce is more in control, and he decides when the Hulk shows up and when he doesn't. So when he shows this control, he's able to use his inner strength to his advantage. And when needed, he allows his angers excuse me, let me talk English for a second. He allows his anger or emotions to work towards his advantage. But then he keeps cool the rest of the time, and he knows how to rein it in as well. So this was probably the most valuable part of this lesson with my son, is being able to show him these 3 different points: when we allow our emotions to overtake us, when we're scared of our emotions and we show weakness, and then the third, when we show up as leaders in the proper way. And really, as a son and father, it's how we should show up as men and fathers and sons and leaders out in the community. It's how we should show up 100% of the time, in control of our emotions, in control of how we express our emotions to other people. And don't get me wrong, it is 100% okay to have emotions. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't have them, but we shouldn't let them control us. We need to be able to maintain control of those emotions and use them as indicators for what drives our actions. So since this conversation with my son, I've been thinking about this a lot. And really what I did was I gave my little boy a great lesson on a term that's called equanimity. And you hear this word a lot, but most people don't stop to explain it, right? And I'll tell you, in my past, I thought that it meant that everybody should get everything, like socialism, right? Because it has a similar tone to it. But really what equanimity means is exactly what we've been talking about. It originates from the Latin word equanimitas. I hope I said that right, but it doesn't matter if I said it right or wrong. What it means is having an even mind and soul. We can't let ourselves get out of balance. So going back to my son for a minute, I think another really important part of this whole conversation is that I met my son where he was at, in his thought patterns that he was at in that day, right? I could have probably put together a lesson on equanimity and gave him a lesson about it, and it would have never reached him at all. But when he asked me about superheroes, something that he was interested in, something that he was really trying to understand me through something that he was interested in, that's when real learning took place. Another thing that I learned out of this is that I had never planned to teach him about equanimity. But it's so important. It's vitally important for my son, for my daughters, for anybody in a leadership role to understand. So now I need to keep this on the radar because of its just dire importance. And that's why I bring it up to you today, is because I think you need to keep it on your radar too. So a couple questions just for further thought, right? And I really want you all to think about this today. How are you passing on being an even mind and soul, equanimity, to the people in your care so that they can lead well? So I don't care if that's your children, your spouse, other people in the community, or at work. It applies to everybody. Everybody's a leader in their own right. Everybody can benefit from equanimity. And let me tell you, something that I've really learned in my career, because I used to be a hothead and I have changed to something totally different. People are going to follow someone who is level-headed over someone who is a hothead, or even someone who underreacts, right? People who don't set boundaries and underreact, or they're a hothead and overreact, those people fall by the wayside in leadership. It's the ones who have a level head every day, have expectations, accountability, and they keep on marching in a direction forward that people are going to follow. And equanimity is one of those key components that helps you get there. So I really hope this resonated with the listeners on here today. I hope that my experiences really added to your tool bag of leadership properties. So now I'm going to ask you, if this did bring you a benefit, I'd like you to pay the piper a little bit. And I'm not asking for a dollar amount. What I'm asking you for is to share this thing, right? So there's a couple ways that you can do that. And I'm going to tell you before I start giving you those ways, that when you do this, you help out this podcast. You get us up in the rankings more. You spread it by your mouth. Whatever the case is, you get it out to more people. And that's the point of all this. So when I ask you to pay the piper, really what I want you to do is, whatever podcast app you're listening to this on right now, you know what? Simply just give it a rating. I'd appreciate a 5-star rating if you think it's worth that. If not, that's fine too. If you could, just leave me a detailed review. You can do that within the same app. Those reviews, people actually read them. And they really help bolster up the ranking of the podcast. Excuse me. Got a little bit brain dead there for a second. And then last but not least, hit that subscribe button on whatever podcasting app you're listening on. So those 3 things again, and the call to action that I give you here today is, let's give this podcast a rating, leave me a detailed review, and hit that subscribe button. If you have any problem doing that, I'd be more than willing to help you. You can hit me up at steve@fireforgedleader.com. You can also view the website at www.fireforgedleader.com, or just simply look up this podcast on any podcast application, and it's simply called Fire Forged Leader. So continue to join us here in the Forge over the next couple weeks and months. We got a lot of good guests coming on. I'm going to be interviewing a couple gentlemen from Untaming Masculinity here pretty soon. We're going to have some psychologists and some different family therapy people on, some different authors, entrepreneurs, and a couple others. And along the way, I'll also have a few interesting things to say myself. Once again, I appreciate y'all. And please add this to your tool bag.
You have just experienced the heat and pressure of the forge. Remember, words without action are meaningless. Now, after the heat of the forge, shape your thoughts, quench your brain, then put your new tools to use, adding to your leadership. Tune in next week for more lessons from the forge.